Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Hands-On channel. Today I want to talk to you about my 10-step plan for a self-reliant homestead slash farmstead. And also, that's going to help me to survive the SHTF collapse, or at least I hope it does. I mean, you can make the best plans in the world and somehow, someone gets through your defenses or something like that and ruins everything. So, I mean, there's a lot more to this than just acquiring land and doing this sort of stuff that we're going to talk about. But, you got to be able to defend that land as well. But these are the 10 key things that I think are necessary, at least in this day and age, to make a successful farmstead. So, first of all, you got to acquire the right land. And I stress the right land. I mean, you don't want to get land that's just all swampland or, whatever that's going to be hard to build on, or maybe the topography is too rough. There's a lot of terrain changes and stuff like that. You might not want that kind of land because it's going to be more expensive to build on that kind of land. And there's going to be less arable farmland, as they call it, usable land to plant crops and to grow other animals and stuff like that. So anyway, you got to acquire the right piece of land. And my wife and I were lucky enough that back during the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we saw the writing on the wall and that things were changing drastically in this country. And so we doubled down and went and bought 100 acres within driving distance of this homestead I'm at right now. And for those of you that are new to the channel, this is my suburb homestead where we're broadcasting right now. But what we're trying to do is eventually set up on the 100 acres over there and be completely or as close to being self-reliant as we possibly can. We'll always have to buy certain things outside, obviously, but if we can produce the majority of the things that we're consuming on a daily basis, that will save us a great amount of money. And not only that, there's just a great sense of satisfaction knowing you did something yourself with your own hands. So that's what we're all about here at the Hands-On channel. So anyway, number two, after you bought that land, you want to learn about the topography of the land, like the lay of the land, where does the water flow, this sort of stuff. And what's the local climate like? Obviously, if you're in the middle of Arizona, the kinds of crops that you're going to be able to grow there versus the kinds of crops that I can grow here in my undisclosed location will be completely different. So you're going to need to do your own research and learn about what zone you're in and stuff like that. And, try to plant within that parameter there. If you're trying to go outside of the box, you're going to probably fail because the climate's going to, put you out of business, basically. You don't want that. You're trying to either produce a product to sell it, or you're trying to produce enough product where you can feed your own livestock and feed your family, stuff like that. After you've acquired the land, you've learned the lay of the land, all that stuff, you want to, number three, find the best building site. And that's going to take a lot of research. Again, you're going to be looking for things like water flow. Can I build a site here? How hard is it going to be for me to get a septic permit? Does the ground permeate properly or whatever? So you're going to be able to put a normal septic system in, or you're going to have to put some fancy system in because the ground doesn't drain. I mean, how hard is it to build an access road where you're wanting to build? How hard is it to get power lines if you're going to stay on the grid? How hard is it going to be to get power lines back there to wherever you're wanting to build? There's a certain point where it's cheaper just to go ahead and go off grid. I know that sounds risky, and it could be in certain circumstances, but that'd be a chance for you to be more energy independent as well when you're building up and searching for your perfect building location. Personally, I don't want to see any neighbors. I really don't want to hear any neighbors, but that's probably not realistic even with 100 acres because I've got some loud neighbors that are next door, and they're hooping and hollering and doing stuff like that, and I want to be as far away from them as I can be, and also as far away from the road as I can be, because it's a dirt road out in front, a gravel road, and every time cars go up and down the road, they kick up a big cloud of dust that on some days washes over my land. And so just imagine if you had clothes hanging out on the line or something like that, they're going to constantly be covered in dust. Your cars, everything's going to be covered in dust. So my solution is to build farther back in the woods where the trees will filter out a lot of that stuff and the noise and things like that. And I can have a more quiet, private homestead where it's out of sight, out of mind. So if a lot of people are driving down the road and you're building right up by the road, they're going to see everything you're doing every day when they're driving back and forth, right? But if you're way back in the woods, yeah, they might see the heavy equipment coming in and out of there, the concrete trucks and stuff like that, but they're not going to, actually see where you are in the building process unless they climb over your fence that says no trespassing and come back there and get you that way, which they could do. It's all a risk, but my philosophy is being out of sight, out of mind is better than being right up on the road. We've basically got 2 building sites that we've selected so far that are realistic to achieve. One of them is almost smack dab in the middle of the 100 acres, and I'm really leaning toward that one because it's way off the road. The other one is up about 500 feet off the road, and to me that's too close. Hang on a second, I got to shut my AC down. So anyway, it's going to be critical for you to find the perfect building site because, again, at least for my wife and myself, this is probably our last time doing this because, I'm in my late 40s, rapidly approaching 50, unfortunately, and, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So I have to do this one last time, and this is probably going to be our forever home unless something else happens. I foresee myself dying of old age there working on the farm, driving a tractor or something like that. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. That's my retirement plan, is to be able to be self-reliant and produce as much of my own stuff as I possibly can. That's, to me, that's the way to remain free. That's the most important thing about all this stuff. Is one of the motivators that I have, my wife has, is we want to be as free as possible. And so that's why we're doing all this stuff. And so next up, after you found that perfect building site, you want to, number 4, build your infrastructure. Your perimeter fencing, things like that, your no trespassing signs, access roads, gates, things like that, water well, grid power supply, etc. Whatever you're going to do. If you're going to do off-grid, you don't have to worry about grid power supply. But if you're close enough to a power grid, what we're planning on doing is starting out on the grid. Even if it's a small scale, we'll be on the grid to some degree, and then later on we can get more and more solar and phase out how much grid power we use, and maybe eventually we won't have to use any. But I'm a guy, you can see all these tools around me. I've got grinders and equipment that runs massive loads, and I think I'm always going to need to have grid power in my shop because the amount of batteries and solar panels and equipment you need to run things like welders and grinders and other large equipment like that has a big draw on it. It's hard to achieve that with solar on its own. So anyway, that's kind of our plan, is to kind of slowly, after we build the house and we're living there and all that, start buying solar panels. But meanwhile, we'll be tied onto the grid, and then hopefully eventually we'll be able to phase out the grid power altogether, at least inside the house. So hopefully that'll keep my electric bill really low, and I'll be able to spend that money on other things that I'm needing. Number 5, we're going to be working on buildings. So we're talking a house, a well house, a barn, a shop, a root cellar / storm shelter, because we're in an area that gets tornadoes, and I'd like to have some place that I could go and, get safe if a tornado was coming my way. Animal coops and pens, other things like that. Some of those will be mobile, like maybe you might do a large scale chicken tractor type deal and, pasture raise your chickens and stuff like that, which I plan on doing a lot of that kind of stuff. Pasture raised pork and poultry, like Joe Salatin. If you don't know who that is, go look him up. He's got a lot of really great videos here on YouTube, all about how to get into pasture raised livestock, all different kinds. And I've learned a lot watching his channel. I really, really like that guy's approach to being a good steward of the land. And I think that's important. Number 6, livestock fencing. And I'm gonna have to look into different options like electric mobile fencing, like the Premier wire they have, that the netting stuff that you can run around that runs off of an electric or a solar panel, a solar charger, I guess they call it. I'd like to have one of those. I'm also talking about permanent paddocks around the property where I'll be able to break up some of my fields into like maybe 10 different paddocks, and I can do rotational grazing on that with like sheep or goats or something like that. Number 7, this is a really important one, and I put it in this order because I think you need to do certain things in a certain order. Like, it wouldn't make sense to go out and invest heavily in livestock if you don't have your fencing sorted out, right, or a way to easily water and feed your animals and stuff. So you have to have all the accompanying accoutrements to go along with this farming stuff. I mean, you're going to need a tractor, you're going to need a four-wheeler, probably. You're going to need all kinds of different implements like brush hogs and, maybe a post hole digger for putting in fences and stuff like that. You're going to need a lot of stuff. Chainsaws, because, tractors are not bulldozers. They're tractors. They're made for like lighter duty farm work. You can't just go plow through a forest like you can on a bulldozer. But a lot of people try, and a lot of people break their tractors that way. They're just not made for that. You can do some light tree removal if it's small enough, but even then, I'd probably do it with a chain and by lifting it out of the ground, or lifting/pushing, not just going and plowing through there like it's a bulldozer. So you have to have all of that equipment. If you're going to have a big area cleared out, it's best to go ahead and hire a guy with a dozer to come in there, or one of these fancy machines that they put on the front of these bobcats and stuff, where it's like a super, it's some sort of a super grinder thing that just grinds the whole forest down. I've seen people clean up forests that way, and I'm sure that works really well. But that's all a lot of money, because you're going to have to pay someone else hourly wages to come in there, whether that be on a dozer or on one of those fancy machines. And, so that's going to be a lot of money. You're going to have money to do all this stuff. And that's one of the reasons that we haven't gotten it all done already, is we're trying to, piecemeal this. We're trying to do it a little bit here and a little bit there as we can afford it. And, I'm not a rich guy, so I'm having to do it slowly, a lot slower than I wanted. Hopefully that will pick up here really soon, though, because we've got tons of projects going on, and I am going to be able to at least fund some of them along the way. So next up is number 7, livestock. We're looking at goats, a certain kind, a certain variety for my climate. We're looking at Spanish/Kiko goats, maybe a mix of those, or maybe, pairs of either or, because they're highly resistant to parasite loads and things like that from my research. Also, you don't have to do as much hoof maintenance on them. Apparently, a lot of goats, their toenails grow pretty long, and you have to trim those things a couple of times a year or whatever. But they claim with the Kikos and the Spanish goats, it's not as big of a problem. Maybe just once a year you might need to inspect them. Yeah, you might have to trim them sometimes, but it's not going to be as often as some of the other varieties. Also, I'm in a relatively, it's weird. Sometimes we're really hot and humid, and sometimes we're dry, but most of the time we're hot and humid. So I would say we're in a humid environment, and goats can have a lot of eye problems and stuff. And supposedly the Kikos and the Spanish have the least eye problems among the goat family and varieties. Next up is pigs, and I want to pasture raise all of these animals as much as possible. We've looked into the Kuni pigs. They're real popular here on YouTube, although they're pretty expensive to get into, and I think that's because of the popularity on social media. One of the things that draws people to them is their meat is much darker than standard, standard variety pork would be kind of a pinkish, light pale color. This Kiko pork is a dark, almost red, almost beef looking color. So it's pretty interesting. They say it's really flavorful. They don't get as big. They take longer to grow out than the other normal style pigs, but they're supposed to be good for raising on pasture. So I'm considering that. Also looking into some other varieties just for like feeder pigs to grow out. But yeah, I'd love to get set up in that. Next up would be sheep. I've got probably, out of our 100 acres, we probably got at least 20 or maybe 30 acres of pasture. So it would be nice to have some sheep go out there and graze that pasture. And the places where I've been and seen sheep put into action, the pastures look excellent, because of course they're fertilizing as they go along. So you're building up your pastures, and the sheep, from what I'm told, unless you keep them in a place too long, they won't overgraze the grass. They'll just eat down to a certain point and bite it clean, kind of like you went along with your lawnmower. So it could be really good for restoring your land. All of these animals, I've got that in the back of my mind, that I'm trying to build up the nutrients in the soil, and maintain the land at the same time. Basically feed my animals the weeds that I would normally have to pay money to brush hog with a tractor, you know. So if I can minimize how much I'm having to put diesel in that tractor, you know, it's not only good for the environment, it's good for my pocketbook, and also less wear and tear on my equipment. So it's a win-win-win in my book. Livestock is the way to go if you've got a big enough piece of land. So other things we would continue to do is meat rabbits and layer chickens. We'd probably do a lot more layer hens just to increase our productivity, and therefore we might be able to sell some of those hens or some of those eggs at the farmer's market. We would also want to look into meat chickens. We've never done pure meat chickens, but I would consider that, and that's another one you could raise on chicken tractors out in a pasture. Quail. We're doing the quail right now. It's mixed results. Our first hatching, we didn't get nearly enough females. We needed a lot more females, and we only ended up with 2 females. So that's a problem because I've got like 6 males total. So I think what we're going to do is cull 5 of the 6 males. Right now they're separated. Only 1 male is with the females, and even that is too much for those 2 females. So we may end up culling all of these, or keeping the 2 females and the 1 male that are together now, and then culling all the other 5 that are in the separate cage and just eating them, because we've never eaten them. We've bought like game hens and stuff like that at the store before, and we really like them, but we've never eaten the quail yet. So we want to see what that's all about and see if we want to continue that mission, or just, you know, sell the quail cage to somebody else, or turn it into a rabbit cage or whatever. But those are things we're thinking of. Pheasant, I would look into that because that's a much bigger bird, and I like the idea of being able to, you know, create a whole meal out of one bird. And they're supposed to taste really good. I don't know if I've ever eaten pheasant or not. I don't remember eating it, but they look delicious. Turkey, my wife and I often talk about, why is it that we don't eat turkey more often? I mean, they're such a fast-growing, large, healthy, big, meat-producing bird that, you know, we should be eating them like, you know, 5-6 times a year, you know, maybe even once a month or something. And I'm not saying you have to eat a whole turkey like you do at Thanksgiving, and all the fillings and dressings and stuffings and accoutrements that go along with that. I'm talking more about, you know, cutting it up into quarters or something, and then just eating it whichever way you want. If maybe one night you want to grill out some turkey or whatever, the next night you want to slow cook it in your crock pot or something like that, whatever. There's a lot of things you can do for variety, and you could supplement turkey anywhere chicken would be used. Yeah, it's a little bit different taste, but I think it's delicious. So turkey is definitely on our list of animals to learn more about. And I already mentioned laying hens, but we want a lot more laying hens so we can have a lot more egg productivity, you know. And that's pretty much it for right now. You notice there's no cattle or any other really large animals on there, and that's because the bigger the animal, the heavier duty equipment you have to have, the more hay you have to bring in. To begin with, most likely, if I deal with any hay, and I'm sure I will with some of this stuff, I'll have to bring in square bales just because that's what I can handle right now. I don't have the pitchfork thing on the back of my truck, or the, you know, the hay fork on the front of my tractor. Maybe eventually I'll get one, but to begin with, I'm going to have to use square bales, and they're more money. Of course, they're labor intensive, moving around by hand and stuff like that, but and maybe eventually I'll find somebody to come and cut some of my fields for hay, and I'll keep some and they'll take some, you know, for the labor, whatever. That, I'd love to get into some of that kind of stuff, but for right now, I've just been brush hogging it, and I don't like that. I want to fill my entire property up with animals that are going to put food on my table directly. And with all these animals, you're definitely going to need to make sure that you don't have coyotes or any other predators like bobcats, or, you know, some places have cougars and such. So you're going to have to make sure you're able to protect your animals. And I've been told by multiple different sources that a guard donkey is one of the best things you can have running with your goats and with your sheep and stuff like that. I don't know, either that or maybe a large dog, Anatolian, or what's the other one, the Australian Shepherd, those big white dogs that you see laying around by the side of the road all the time. that's because those dogs are working dogs, and they're supposed to be laying around next to a flock of sheep or a herd of goats or whatever. So that's what the plan is. Number 8, we're going to be learning more and more about processing our own meat. Not too long ago, maybe a month and a half ago, we culled our first rabbit. Yeah, it wasn't the nicest thing in the world. Those rabbits are sweet and really wonderful creatures, and it's hard to do it. I ain't gonna lie to you. And what we decided to do to make sure we had a clean kill was I used my little 22 caliber pellet rifle, air pellet rifle. It's one of the pump up kind, and I know it's really powerful. It'll go through a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood pretty easily. So I knew that if it would do that, it would penetrate the skull of the rabbit, and that's what I did. I culled it that way, and then my wife cleaned it out because she's always been a lot more into that sort of stuff. I mean, not trying to make her sound weird, but she's in school and things like that. She was always the one that was better at the dissecting the animals. And, I can clean fish and I could clean rabbits as well. But this last time my wife did it, and I watched her do it, of course. And it wasn't any big deal. I mean, it's kind of like pulling off a wet sock, to be honest with you, skinning a rabbit. And then it's just a matter of, knowing how to get the guts out of there without, tainting your meat. And so there's a learning process there, but we want to learn that with everything. A lot of people eat goats in a lot of different cultures. In fact, I read something recently that was fascinating to me. Goat is actually the number one selling meat around the world when you account for all the other cultures that, dine on goat on a regular basis, just like we dine on cattle. And I think as things get weirder and weirder with the way that the government and the FDA and all these other organizations are allowing mRNA vaccines and GMO feeds and stuff like that to be fed to these, commercially grown livestock animals, then eventually things are going to, if they're not already happening, eventually bad things are going to start happening to people that are consuming that meat. And that's one of the main reasons why my wife and I want to do this, is we want to know what we're putting in our body. We want to know that it's pure and it doesn't have a bunch of GMO and mRNA vaccines pumped into it. And we've raised it and cared for it. And it wasn't raised in horrific conditions like you see a lot of these chicken houses where they've got 500,000 chickens in one big giant warehouse and the chicken never sees daylight. It's just, to me, that's horrific. I want to see my animals being happy and frolicking out in the pasture like they're supposed to do, chewing grass, chewing the cud, whatever they're doing. I want to see them doing that, depending on what animal it is. And that makes me happy. It gives me pleasure to know that, right now, I counted them up the other day. I've got even here in my suburb house, I've got 20 some odd animals, 24, 25 animals that count on me to remember to feed them and water them every day. And they're dependent on me to survive. And that's the symbiotic relationship that we have, and also these animals are producing fertilizer, the rabbit pellets that go great in your garden. So it just all works out into the cycle of life. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's freedom. It really is freedom. Yeah, you're going to have to work your ass off to have it. And that's the hardest thing that people can hear, is you're going to have to work hard for your freedom. It's not going to be handed to you anymore. But in the future, I think this is how we survive. Number 9, vegetable garden. Notice it's way down on my list. And it's not that I don't like vegetables. There are a lot of vegetables like peppers and tomatoes and things. I love corn, all this stuff. I love it. But my wife and I have noticed over the years, it's harder for us as far as what the input versus the output is harder growing vegetables than it is growing livestock of any kind. Chickens, for example. I've got 5 hens right now. We're getting on average right now, and they're older hens. We're getting on average about 3 eggs a day. That is more eggs than my wife and I can consume during a week. So we already have an abundance of eggs. We give some away. We sell some. Anyway, the point is, the vegetable garden, over the years that we've been doing it, it always starts out the same. It looks great in the spring, early summer. It looks great, still looking good. And then the hot, dry part of summer, the dog days of summer kick in. And no matter what, we don't feel like going out and picking weeds because it's too damned hot. We don't feel like moving the hose that day. Oh, I forgot to water. And oh no, everything's got scorched because I forgot to water one too many days. There's a point where it just gets to be such a chore that neither my wife or myself want to mess with it. And that happens every single year. And every year at the end of the summer, we're like, man, we ain't doing that again next year. It's just not worth it. It is worth it though, because the fruit and the vegetables that you produce in your own garden are always 10 times better than anything you're ever going to buy in the produce section at your store. So that's why it's on the list, but it's way down there. And I'll probably garden a lot differently than I do here. I'll probably, get myself a single plow or something and learn to do some light plowing and mix in the rabbit manure, the pig manure, the goat, the sheep, whatever else I can get my hands on, and amend the soil to the point where I'll be able to grow straight in the ground. And we'll just have to do it in rows and clean those rows out in some way or fashion. Maybe I can run rabbit tractors down the middle of the rows to clean them out, keep them weed free. I don't know. I've got lots of ideas, but until we get all this stuff set up, I can't really move forward on any of them. That's the difficult part, is figuring out the right firing order to do all this stuff in. Number 10. This is kind of a bonus for me and my particular piece of land. I've got 2 big rainwater ditches that run through my property. One of them is wetter than the other one and deeper. But both of them could be converted into ponds. And I see in the future at least 2 to 3 new ponds on my property. So I already have the one pond that's great for fishing, but I need to at least build 1 or 2 livestock ponds for, my goats and my sheep and stuff like that, to where it's easier for me to just use rainwater to water them. That'd be a lot better, right? And so that's the plan. I want to put in a couple of ponds in places where I know water flows and where it will hold water. Even, for livestock pond, even if I have to go in there and put liners in, maybe it's too sandy there and it's not holding water, I could go in and put some liners in a couple of places and make some small, no deeper than 4 or 5 feet deep ponds, where anytime it's raining really good in the early spring, early summer, I'll always have that water there for my livestock. And that'll cut down on how much electricity I have to either produce or pay for to pump that water up out of the ground, right? So all of this stuff, I want to build a system that, it's never going to fully take care of itself. But if you can do as much as possible to make your work as easy as possible, then it's going to make your life a lot better and a lot more fun. You're going to have a lot more time after you do all your chores and feeding all your animals. You're going to have a lot more time to go out and twist the throttle and ride the motorcycle around and have some fun, or the four-wheeler, or shoot some guns for target practice, making sure that if a coyote or any other predator, whether that be on 2 legs or 4, comes messing around with your place, you'll be tuned up and ready to go. You'll have everything dialed in. So that's my plan, guys. I want to put all this together. That's why we bought the land. That's why we basically rolled the dice when we saw the COVID stuff was going sideways, and we were like, nah, I opt out. I'm not doing this. Where they can't tell me I have to put a vaccine in my arm or I have to mask up on my own property because I declare it a constitutional zone. We're going by the old ways out there. At least that's the way I look at it. So, guys, let me know what you think about my plan. Do you have a similar plan? If not, I highly advise you to, take pen to paper like I have done here and write it down. It'll help you to, kind of work it out, how it's all going to go. And then you'll be able to figure out that firing order that's going to be really important for you, so that you don't spend more money than you should have, and you're able to do all these things the best way and the cheapest way possible, so you can be as self-reliant as you possibly can be, because I think that's freedom. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. As always, I stand for liberty. I hope you do too.